Hey everyone, today is going to be something a little bit different. So I successfully glazed 6 of the 9 pieces that came out of the kiln about a week ago, and really excited about that because it was my first experience. Everything came out really great, and even the anomalies that happened that you can't predict because of the way heat chemically reacts with the glazes were just fine with me, so no problems there. Now, this is a piece that was fired with the very first studio that I worked with, and it's sort of an old piece, and I'm happy with this piece because of the overall look. She's graceful, but I've never been happy with the face. I was too new, I hadn't studied enough. Proportions aren't great, but overall, this is a good piece to experiment on. And what I'm going to be experimenting with today is the matte glazes that I bought from Mako. So I'm gonna pick this up and show you. This is a jar of the matte glaze, and I don't know if you can see what that's supposed to look like when it's fired. It's called leather, and sort of a light brownish beige. Also, I will be working with this one, which is tea dust. Well, you know what? I'm probably not going to do the leather, which I initially pulled out because I thought a much lighter color, I should apply that sort of as a base first and then go over everything with the darker color. But I don't think there's a need because there's just not enough contrast. So I'm going to do her in this tea dust color, and hopefully you can see that. Very deep brown. And of course, wherever the clay has contours and concaves, you don't know how the glaze is going to react in the heat. It might come out even, or it might come out with light spots. All of it's really interesting, so it's whatever. And I don't know if I told you guys before, but one of the reasons that I stayed away from even bothering with glazing was because everyone told me that you never know what you're going to get. I didn't like the thought of having a very specific color theme in mind for one of these pieces, and the possibility of the colors blending badly, creating some sort of color combination that I would think is hideous, and now I'm just married to it. So I ended up doing a lot of research on YouTube to find out, can you paint over glazed pieces that have a high gloss surface? And just when I was about to give up, I saw this thumbnail of a vase with that was glazed in a pretty caramel brown, high gloss, and then the next thumbnail was it covered in white paint, or what seemed to be white paint. So found out that there's a product called Dixie Belle Slick Stick, which of course I immediately went out and bought. And this woman had purchased an urn. It was an urn, not a vase. It was an urn at a thrift shop that was already glazed in that high gloss. And this Dixie Belle product works as a primer where you just paint it on. She recommended about 2 coats, and it adheres to the high gloss surface but dries like, I guess, an enamel paint would, so that now you could paint over that entire piece if it didn't come out the way you wanted it to out of the glaze firing. And that was like the heavens opened up, harps were playing, and the angels were singing, I swear to God, because I was just like, yo, that's what I need to be able to do. I need to have control over the color if something comes out in a way that displeases me. So like I said, we did the glazing with 6 of the pieces, and they came out great, but all of them are high gloss. I'm not a fan. I like a much more earthy, organic look to sculptures, and because I'm not at all familiar with the different techniques that work with a bisque fired piece, there's a lot of research that I have to do to find out what can work for me. But I thought the simplest thing to do would be to, instead of buying glazes that end up a high gloss, get some that are matte. And I just realized I've been talking all this time with no motion, so this is a really boring video at the start, but I'm going to start applying the glaze now. And at the studio where I take my pieces now, Joe's Picasso, shout out to the wonderful Katie, who has been such an amazing, amazing resource and help to me. She always recommends 3 coats for full coverage. So I've got this piece on a turntable so that I can work around. And what I'm doing now is applying the very first coat of this matte glaze. And this should end up going to the studio to be scheduled for firing, not next week because I don't get paid, and it's all about budgeting and planning on this end. So it's going to go to the studio week after next, and I cannot wait to see the results and see what this comes out like and share that with you guys. So this is a pretty cut and dry process with just painting on the glaze. There's not a lot for me to talk about. So I'm going to take a moment because the TV is up a little too loud and I don't want you hearing all of that. And this is just going to be me painting over the glaze. So until there's something that I feel I need to speak about with you, I hush now. Now with the lighter glazes, depending on the absorption level of the clay, it can be really difficult to tell where you started. So I find for me, it's best to have some sort of plan of attack. And that's usually to, in my mind, create a visual vertical line down the center so that I know I started at a particular halfway point on the sculpture. Now with this one, this glaze is going on, it's very dark. So there's not going to be that issue of wondering like, oh my God, did I glaze this part? Because on the other ones that I glazed with colors that were just as dark as this, they seemed to really, really soak into the clay, so much so that there was just the lightest tinted area to even give you an indication that you had visited that spot with the glaze brush. So with this one, it's so dark that that's not a problem. And I'm thankful for that, because I didn't feel like trying to figure out where I started. Another thing about this piece was that it made it out of the kiln almost intact, but not quite. This top bun right here, that little afro puff, it popped off very cleanly, like she was scalped. That's how cleanly it popped off. So what I did was reattached it with a product called Clay Mender. I just knocked the towel over, by Mako, and I let that set. And they say that clay has such a memory with regards to breaks and areas that you try to repair. I'm just hoping that once it goes into the kiln again, it won't separate for a second time, and that clay mender will do the trick. So you can just keep your fingers crossed with me in that regard. And I think that's all that needs to be said right now about this particular piece that I'm glazing with a matte finish glaze. They do say that it's best to stroke and apply in one direction, and then when you go to apply the second coat, apply in a different direction. So I'm focusing on going up and down with my strokes. Then when this is completely dry and I go to apply the second coat, I'm going to go across for coverage. And then that last and final application will either be diagonal or I'll return to up and down. We'll see. I guess it's going to depend on my mood when I start again. Now with this piece, it's not very, very, very refined. So I do have to attack and come at it from this angle with the paintbrush, just because there are a lot of little divots and craters that you can't see, but I can see where the paint is missing it. So I just have to sort of stab the paint on to make sure it goes into those spots. Also, I'm using a really large paintbrush. I have two more beside me that I can switch to for areas that I see that I'm missing, like this ear, the crevice in there. This large paintbrush might do the trick. Yeah, it's doing the trick okay. But if there are any areas I see that I've missed that are difficult to get into with the large paintbrush, I'll just go ahead and go at it with the smaller paintbrush. And now I think I'm done talking, so I hush now. I'm starting to maneuver a little more carefully right around here, because the rose is going to be a lighter color. It's going to be that leather that I showed you. That's the name of the color. The leather that I showed you at the start of the video. So I'm just trying to avoid the rose until I get to apply the leather. Hindsight is 20/20, and I'm realizing I should have done that first. But I had a different thought process going into it, so it's too late now to worry about it. Because they say dark overpowers the lighter colors usually once it goes into the kiln for glazing. So if you've gone over an area that you want to be light with a dark color, it's best to go ahead and just scrape that away and go over it multiple times with the lighter color so that it doesn't overpower it and show through. Of course, the best thing to do is just be as careful as you possibly can. And as I continue to the back, making sure not to switch directions and start applying differently, so I'm still going with the up and down. Now also, because this is a matte finish, the studio that I work with, Joe's Picasso, normally puts a clear coat onto the pieces that are being glazed fired for extra vitrification, extra fortification of the piece. And because most people that are glazing the sculpture works that they do there at the studio, they usually want that high gloss look. So I've already spoken with the studio owner, Katie, and these pieces are not going to receive the clear coat so that we can see exactly what the glaze does on its own. Now, because the other pieces usually get clear coated, we're not applying glaze to the interior because it's going to have that vitrification. However, with this one, I'm making a personal choice to glaze as much of the interior as I can reach, just because it's not going to have that extra layer of glazing protection, and I want it to. All right, so I'm pretty good with the coverage on that. So that is the first coat. Go ahead and dipping the brush into the water, cleaning it out. You do not mix water with the slip. It's not necessary because you want the slip to go on with full coverage. And I guess I'll come back in like a half an hour to an hour and see what this looks like completely dry. And then I'll go ahead and add another coat of the different color, which is called leather, to the rose. And right now I'm just scraping off some areas where I let the darkest color touch where the lighter color is going to go. I'm not really concerned about that though. I think it'll be interesting to see what the blend creates because I want it to be a blend of both of the colors on the rose. So yeah, that's it for right now. So this is our first experiment with glazing with the matte clay and seeing eventually in another couple of weeks what it turns out like in the kiln. And you can say that you were there from the beginning. And as I told you before, there was clay mender added to the part that broke off. I'm probably going to end up adding a little more just because I don't want this to explode off again in the kiln. And I can still see the areas or the lines where the clay mender didn't go into it well, or it absorbed and that crack is still there. And I really, really, really want to get rid of that. So yeah, I'll add more clay mender in between the first and second quote. Did I say quote? Lord Jesus. I meant to say coat. And then I'll let the second coat dry. And if I feel like I need to add more clay mender in between the second and third coats, then I will. Now, I don't know if you remember, but I am going to glaze as much as I can reach of the inside of this piece. But I think we'll go ahead and do that last. Let's get the exterior taken care of and worry about the interior at another time. Thanks for hanging in there with me, and I'll catch you again a little bit later for the second coat. Peace.